Thank you to the ICC and the CRPD Committee for the invitation to discuss the review of Australia's practices under the CRPD and the involvement by the Australian Human Rights Commission in that process. We're particularly pleased to participate today via video, and we hope that this technology will be used more frequently in the future. I would also like to thank for their support the Director General of the United Nations Geneva Office, the Secretary General's Special Envoy on Disabilities, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the Secretary General of the ITU. The Australian Human Rights Commission fully supports the Committee's initiative in developing guidelines for cooperation with national human rights institutions. Perhaps our recent experience will be useful in preparing these guidelines. Australia appeared before the Committee during the 10th session in September last year. It proved to be a very positive experience for the Australian Human Rights Commission, and one that was generously supported by the Secretariat. While the Commission's Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Graham Innes, attended the review as a member of the Australian Government delegation, he did so uniquely as an independent statutory officer and was able to make independent interventions. I believe that we're the first national human rights institution to go before the CRPD Committee as part of a government delegation, a first that reflects Australia's history with respect to disability law. Some years before the International Convention on Disabilities came into effect, Australia adopted the Disability Discrimination Act in 1992. This was a novel reversal of positions because typically Australia will ratify a convention first and implement it with legislation later. Australia also played a strong role in drafting the CRPD, so we've got a special interest in its success. And finally, Australia has a dedicated Disability Commissioner, and we have a highly engaged disability sector in Australia. In light of our experience recently in appearing before the Committee, may I respectfully suggest that other national human rights institutions should build relationships with government and civil society as early as possible and to share information and facilitate dialogue. We began to reach out to government departments and civil society almost a year before Australia's appearance. This was done to make sure that Australia's review was included in the planning by government and civil society for the coming year. This also strengthened the relationship between the Commission, non-government organisations and government, and allowed plenty of time to build momentum before going into the review itself. We consulted extensively with members of civil society as they developed their shadow report and encouraged as many organisations as possible to be involved in that process. We made direct references to the shadow report prepared by civil society in our own report, and we urged the Committee to give due consideration to all the issues raised. When the time came to draft our own report, a substantial amount of information was already before the Committee from government and civil society. We therefore elected not to do a fully comprehensive report, but rather to focus on particular issues. Our submission focused on recent work and areas where we felt there could be some improvement. Our submission enabled us to be strategic and to raise issues where we have particular expertise and experience. But let me mention some of the challenges. As for many aspects of the work of a national human rights body, appearing before a UN committee is labour-intensive. The downside of preparing a focused report is that some civil society groups felt that we neglected other issues. Another challenge for the Commission was the fact that our appearance took place during an election period. Under Australian law, once an election is announced, the government assumes a caretaker role, so that it was unable to respond directly to the Committee's questions about future actions or policy developments. The government delegation was, however, able to provide the Committee with information on legislative, policy and other measures adopted during the review period. The CRPD's concluding observations were adopted 1 month after our new Prime Minister was sworn in. The Australian Government has yet to respond to those concluding observations. At the Australian Human Rights Commission, we need to work on maintaining momentum with the Government and to encourage it to respond positively to the Committee's observations. In conclusion, I would like to comment on the Committee's proposed guidelines for national human rights institution participation. Firstly, we strongly encourage the Committee to take into account the unique role of national human rights institutions and to provide opportunities for engagement across the entire review process. One example is that national human rights bodies should be given specific speaking roles and meeting times during the review. It should also be made clear that participation is irrelevant to its respective state's approval. We also believe that there are further opportunities to increase the accessibility of the committee's procedures through the use of new technologies. This is, of course, particularly important to a country like Australia, as it is very expensive to travel to Geneva. Following Australia's appearance before the CRPD committee, we were pleased to receive positive feedback from our own government, from civil society, and also from the committee itself. It took time developing such strong relationships with all our stakeholders. However, it certainly strengthened the integrity of the process and the value of the outcomes. The challenge for us now lies in following up and implementing the committee's recommendations, and I very much look forward to the dialogue that will follow shortly to hear how other national human rights institutions are working with the committee. Thank you very much.